books.
To listen to us. Erev Tov, everyone. So the final hours of Pesach Sheni. Last night we started talking about Pesach Sheni, what it is, and different minhagim related to the day. There's another point which comes up in the halachic literature as well, quite interesting, that Pesach Sheni is also brought as the Yotzar of Rabbi Meir Balanes. So maybe that's another reason not to say Tachanun. But it's very interesting. There's a sefer called Masaot Eretz Yisrael. It's a book which was written about 70 years ago or so. It was published, written by Abraham Ya'ari. And it's a collection of all different diaries of different people who came and travels from times of the Rishonim and onwards. They came to Eretz Yisrael and their diaries and where they went and what they did, etc. The first account that's brought in that sefer is from Binyamin Mitudela, which I have a special affinity for because I live on the street that's named after him. But that's and it goes through the Ramban and talks about his sales in Akko and Yerushalayim, etc. Anyway, one of the accounts there is by Reb Moshe Basula, this is written in 1523, so about 500 years ago, and he says something very interesting. He says that the whole Hilula at Meron and Lag BaOmer, etc., it may have been that originally it started off with Pesach Sheni. That originally people, and there's a lot of evidence for this, that people would go up to the kever of Rabbi Meir in Tiberia, and they would go up and they would stay for 2 or 3 days. Eventually started Rabbi Meir, end up with Rabbi Shimon, whatever it is. But he talks in this account. He says, "B'tetvav b'Iyar shekonu Pesach Sheni afsu sham b'Meron hashayala gdola." There was a great convoy going from Meron. Hayu sham yoter me-elef nefashot, more than 1,000 people, which at the time, 500 years ago, was quite a number. They came all the way from Damascus with their families, coming to Rov Kal Tzvat, most of the people of Tzvat, and the Kfar Shesh Ba Me'alash, Nitman Balashpi, Ubno, and he goes on and he says, Gam Mikol HaSvivot Ba'az LeMeron, already 500 years ago, everybody was coming there. But again, this is not unlike BaOmer, this is Pesach Sheni. ועמדנו שם 2 ימים ו2 לילות, חוגגים ושמחים, we were there for 2 days and 2 nights, התפללנו על כל ציוני הצדיקים אשר שם כנזכר, at all the different קברי צדיקים in the area, אחרי כן הלכנו כולנו טבריה, then he says we went to Tveria, we were there for 4 days, לרחוץ בחמי טבריה, to wash in the hot springs of Tveria as well, ולהתפלל על קברי הצדיקים אשר שם. So that's something else that's mentioned. It's quite interesting. That's also connected to this day and connected to these days as well. I don't know. Seemingly, it may be related. I saw a theory that maybe because they were there, we still have the morning customs of the Sfira, so stay until like BaOmer, until I don't know. That's what he writes. But seemingly, maybe it's connected to the fact that this is the Yotzar of Rabbi Meir and Lag BaOmer, which is held to be the Yotzar of Rabbi Shimon. It may or may not be, but that's in any event. So, but going back into the Psukim, so something else that comes out of this story of Pesach Sheni. So it's very interesting. We mentioned yesterday, and we saw the Psukim. So Rashi tells us that this whole story of Pesach Sheni really should have been, well, Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. It was in every sense of the word, it was the second Pesach, because this was they've been in the Midbar now for a year. They bring the Korban Pesach. This was, we know, the only time which they brought the Korban Pesach until we get to Sefer Yoshua, so we get into Eretz Yisrael. And then immediately afterwards, the story of Pesach Sheni, because these individuals who were Tamei Nefesh, who were coming into contact with the corpse, very interesting discussion as well in the Gemara and in the Midrash as to which corpse it was. Why were they Tamei? What happened? Get to in a moment. But this whole story takes place in, obviously, it's Iyar. Well, it begins in Nisan, and then Iyar of that year. So the Psukim tell us, "V'davar Hashem Moshe ben Bar Sinai b'shana shenit b'tzeitam me'eretz Mitzrayim." This was the second year coming out of Egypt. B'chodesh harishon le'mo, in the first month. We're talking about Nisan because we're talking about Pesach. So Nisan of the second year. Now Rashi over here tells us, he says b'chodesh harishon. He says parasha sheberosh hasefer lo ne'amar ad Iyar. This is taking place in Nisan. Obviously Pesach Sheni is in Iyar, but that's afterwards. But before that, well, the Psukim which open up Sefer Bamidbar, that took place in Iyar. That's a month later. Right? The Sefer begins. V'davar Hashem Moshe ben Bar Sinai b'Ohel Moed be'echad lechodesh hasheni b'shena shinit l'tzitam me'eretz Mitzrayim. In other words, it doesn't leave any room for doubt. The Torah tells us explicitly which day, which month, which year. So Perek Tet, which is Parashat Ba'alotcha, when they bring the Korban Pesach, takes place before Perek Aleph, which opens off Sefer Bamidbar. Right? There's no way to get around that. So Rashi says, "Lamata she'en seder mukdam u'mauchar b'Torah." You learn from here there is no mukdam u'mauchar. The Torah is not written in chronological order. We've mentioned this in the past briefly, but there is a big discussion amongst the Rishonim. When do we say ein mukdam u'mauchar b'Torah? Rashi is a lot more relaxed about using this idea as opposed to the Ramban and others who say where we have to say there's no other choice but to say that it was written unchronologically. So then we'll accept that. If there is a way to resolve the psukim in such a way that it could be chronological, so there are certain commentaries who say we have to do that, and that's the way to learn. But this is one of those rare examples where nobody can argue, where it's clear that it's ein mukdam u'mauchar. So the question is, why then is it written that way? Why was this not written at the beginning of the Sefer? And he says, this will be disparaging, this will be disgraceful to Bnei Israel. We don't want to draw attention to this fact, right? If you put it up at the beginning of the Sefer, everybody always remembers the beginning, the opening, right? The most famous Rashi on any Sefer in the Torah is the first one. Everybody remembers that. Everybody remembers what's at the beginning. You get into Perek Tet, okay, not paying so much attention anymore. So he says, the fact that it was only this Pesach which they brought, only once the entire 40 years do they fulfill the mitzvah. So that's something which is not so wonderful. So we don't want to draw attention to that. Therefore, the Torah changed the order. It brings it here in the middle, not at the beginning, etc. Everybody asks, right, what's the knut? What's the problem? So they only brought the Korban Pesach in the desert once. Why? First of all, the Korban Pesach is connected to Eretz Yisrael. They may not have actually been obligated in it for the rest of those 40 years. But there's another reason. And the Siftei Chachamim over here, as a commentary on Rashi, says the following. He says, Im tomar lama lo ichlichan Moshe she'asu Pesach. They were 40 years in the desert. They were under the leadership of Moshe Rabbeinu. So why didn't he say, oh, they didn't want to, whatever? Why didn't he make them do it? He says, Yesh lomar she'ayu arbe shelo hayu nimolim. They did not perform Brit Milah in the Midbar. They couldn't perform Brit Milah in the Midbar. It was Pikuach Nefesh. It was the conditions did not allow it. And since they had not done Brit Milah, it's explicit. They were not able to bring the Korban Pesach. So Onis Rachmana Patre. So what's the problem? Why is this a problem at all? So says the Siftei Chachamim. He says Yesh Lomar Shehem Gamu Mikoach Avonotehem. He says no. The fact that they were in that situation in the first place, that is the gnut. That is their fault. Why? Were it not for the chet, right? Chet HaMeraglim, they were meant to go in another 3 days. 40 years in the Midbar was not meant to be 40 years. It's meant to be 3 days, and that's it. In Eretz Yisrael, the story's over. But because they didn't do that, right, he explains, because of the Chataim, so the situation was created that instead of that, they were in the Midbar for 40 years, and they were in a situation where they were unable to bring the Korban Pesach, or not chayiv in the Korban Pesach, etc. That's the gnut, is that they were 40 years in the Midbar, not the fact that they didn't, just that they didn't bring the Korban Pesach. And therefore, that is why Torah does not want to call out attention to it. That is one interpretation. There is another interpretation which somebody mentioned to me yesterday, which also the Bavitcher Rebbe and others point out, which is the Maharal says, Maharal writes in Goraria, he says gnut doesn't necessarily mean in the sense of punishment, not in the sense that they did something wrong, but the fact is there's a mitzvah opportunity which they were unable to fulfill. Once you don't fulfill it, so you're lacking the mitzvah, you're lacking what the mitzvah brings. He says, yes, it's true. Honest Rahmana Patre, you're not going to be punished, but you didn't have what the mitzvah could give you. And you see, the problem is that they were okay with that they accepted that there was no. Over here, in this parsha, really the gnut is not just the fact that it tells us about Pesach that took place once in the first year and the second year, but it's the fact that after that took place, and there were certain individuals who couldn't be part of that, and they couldn't bring the Korban Pesach. So what did they do? They didn't just say, oh, okay, I have honest Rahmana Patre. They came up, they said, Lama Nigara, why should we be left out? We also want to do that. So you see here that a few individuals, a few individuals could come and they could add that mitzvah. So if the entire nation felt the same way and they came to Moshe Rabbeinu, what would have happened? Maybe they would have come into Eretz Yisrael. I don't know. But the fact that they just accepted that situation, when you see there were those, and there were individuals within Bnei Israel who said, Lama Nigara, that in itself, that is the gnut, and that is the lesson that we learn from there. One more point, which is very interesting in terms of, as I said, who was this Tmeim Lenefesh Adam? Who was the Adam? Where did they come into contact with the corpse here in this time in the Midbar? So the Gemara, Grand Sukkah, brings three opinions. So it's on Daf Kafei at the bottom of Amud Aleph, towards the beginning of Amud Bet. It says the Tanya, Vahi Anashim Asher Hayu Tmeim Lenefesh Adam. Otam Anashim Mi Hayu. Who were they? So interesting. The Gemara asks who were they. It doesn't tell us who they were, but it tells us who they were carrying. Right. So opinion number one, it says Nosei Alonosh Kal Yosef Hayu. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Yosef Aglili says they were carrying the bones of Yosef HaTzadik, and therefore they were tamein that way. Second opinion is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Mishael ve'Eltzafan hayu, shayu oskin ben Nadav ve'Avihu. Says it was the sons of Aaron, the remaining sons of Aaron Cohen, who had the it was the sons of Aaron who had died, Nadav and Avihu, those who were carrying their corpses, or who engaged, dealt with them. And then there's a third opinion. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, Roskin b'meit mitzvah hayu. There was a meit mitzvah. Who is the meit mitzvah? Why was it? Was this in the midbar? Not sure. But that's what the Gemara says. So those are the three opinions. The Midrash Shmot Rabbah, Pashat B'Shalach, goes like the first opinion. Very fascinating. It ties it. It says that there is an intrinsic connection between Yosef HaTzadik and this whole concept of Pesach Sheni. It says it's fascinating. The Midrash says, when they were leaving Egypt, so Moshe Rabbeinu came and he cried out. He said, Yosef, Yosef, says the time has come, the time to fulfill the oath. It's the time's up. Where are you? Right? Come with us. Miyad nitnadned ha'aron, the aron of Yosef, which was in the Nile, it started to move, and atlo Moshe, and Moshe Rabbeinu took it. Shneimah ve'ikach Moshe et atzmot Yosef. Vayu atzmotav shel Yosef mechazrinim ha'em b'midbar 40 shana. So the bones of Yosef were with them in the midbar for the 40 years. Amar le HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ata amarta le'achecha anochi achalkel etchem. Says, Hashem said to Yosef, as it were, you said to your brothers, I will sustain you, I will look after you, I will take care of you. Yeah? Chayecha, ata niftar v'yu atzmotecha mechazrinim ha'em b'midbar 40 shana. Right? You say you're going to look after them, not just in your life, but in your death as well. Your bones are going to go with them through the midbar. Shenema, vayhi anashim asher hayu tmeim lenefesh adam, ve'en adam ela Yosef. Okay, the Midrash learns from the pasuk in Tehillim that Adam relates to Yosef. And then it says, B'zchut atzmotecha em osim Pesach Katan. Okay, so that's also, we saw yesterday, Pesach Sheni is also called Pesach Katan, but it's in the merit of the bones of Yosef. Ki hashbea hishbia et bnei Yisrael. Lama shnei pamim, why does it say twice? He made them take an oath. Ela hu nishba she'en lahem, hu nishba lahem she'en b'libo alehem. He swore that he had nothing left in his heart against them. V'hem nishbaim lo she'en b'libam alav. And they swore that they had nothing against him. In other words, that there was harmony, that there was reconciliation. After everything that had happened, that the fact that Yosef HaTzadik was able to reconcile together with the family and bring them we go from a situation of lo yachlu davro l'shalom. They couldn't talk to each other. If ever there was a time somebody had the reason not to talk to somebody, it's after what they did to him. But nonetheless, that's essentially the lesson of Pesach Sheni, the lesson of that there is a second chance, that there is a way back, that it's not just to say it's over. No, there is a possibility to come back and to make amends, and perhaps that is the connection between Yosef HaTzadik specifically on this day of Pesach Sheni. Rabbi Chananya ben Akasha Omer, HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakot Yisrael, yifach b'aleim Torah mitzvot.